Yeah, start.
Thank you. So, JaiBhim, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what part of the globe you are joining. I will just brief you about the BHG. Before that, I'm Sanjay Bhagat, and I'm a moderator for today's ALS sessions. ALS is Ambedkar Lecture Series. Boston Study Group, which is popularly known as the BHG, is a non-profit registered with IRS and Ambedkarite organization in the New England, USA area, dedicated to working towards a just and equitable society. We organize workshops on caste in universities, monthly meetings, Ambedkar Lecture Series, where speakers from various countries speak on variety of subjects. We engage in other social activities in the Boston area to create educational and organizing infrastructure to carry forward our mission. Our membership is composed of individuals, families, students, scholars, academics, and workers who share our vision of equality and upliftment of the socially oppressed people. We are particularly interested in creating support structure and working with the students from historically marginalized backgrounds. We are inspired by those who work for human welfare, from Buddha, Sant Ravidas to Savitribai, Jyotiba Phule, Periyar, and to Dr. Ambedkar. We also publish a magazine twice a year called as the Awakened. And this is a digital magazine. You can find all these issues on our website at bostonstudygroup.org. And we basically encourage you to submit any articles you would like to publish here. This is a one forum for all the diaspora to basically show their talent literally as well as in the arts. Due to security breach of the Zoom meeting in recent past, we have put some measures in place, like we have muted everyone during the speech. You can chat with the co-host and host only and not with anyone else. These measures may be inconvenient to some of you, and we feel very bad about it. I'm sure you will understand and bear with us. The preamble to the Indian Constitution read as, "We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thoughts, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individuals and the unity and integrity of the nation." In Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's philosophy, liberty and equality had a place, but he added that the unlimited liberty destroyed equality and absolute equality left no room for the liberty. In his philosophy, law had a place only as a safeguard against the breaches of liberty or equality. But he did not believe that law can be a guarantee for breaches of liberty or equality. I believe undermining of Constitution in last 10 years is testimony to that. In last 10 years, we observed deteriorating situation in Indian politics. Intellectuals putting in the jail under false pretext, murdering those who speaks for the common people, biased media, growing atrocities on the oppressed communities, corruption in education system, and downsizing of public institutions. Attacks on minorities and politics of hate against them in the name of religions are concerning to the common man. So today we have Aakar Patel as ALS speaker. He will be speaking about undermining the Constitution from inside, how India undid liberty and equality. To tell briefly about Aakar Patel, he is an Indian journalist, activist, and author. He serves as the head of the Amnesty International in India between 2015 and 19, and currently serves as the chair of the board of Amnesty International in India. He is the author of Our Hindu Rashtra, on account of majoritarianism in India, and of Price of the Modi Years, which examines the administrative performance of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In 2014, he authored a translation of the Sadat Hasan Manto's Urdu non-fiction Why I Write. Aakar has also worked with several Indian media organizations in various capacities, including deputy editor of the newspaper Deccan Chronicle at Darling Kinserly, editor-in-chief at Midday Multimedia Limited. Aakar recently authored a fiction book, After Masiha. Aakar will be speaking for 30 to 45 minutes, followed with 30 minutes of Q&A. You may please type your questions in chat box or raise the hand when we start the Q&A session. So with these brief introductions, Aakarji, stage is all yours.
JaiBhim, thank you very much, Sanjay. Thank you to all of you for joining. I'll speak today about the subject at hand, which is how India has undid basically what was a fairly liberal and pluralistic constitution, authored for the most part by Babasaheb Ambedkar, and did it in a different way from Pakistan. So my talk today will be on how in South Asia there are two routes to approach majoritarianism and undo constitutional rights. One is the route that Pakistan took, and the other is the route that India took and is taking. I'll begin with the Pakistan route to set the context. So, in my opinion, India was divided because of the inability of the Congress to come to a political agreement with the Muslim League on the sharing of power. The fundamental issue was how much power in a democratic state should populations get. And it was the view of the Congress that, the view of Nehru, I should say specifically, that India should retain a very centralized level of power that resembled that of the Raj, where the union government sitting in Delhi would control not merely the broad functions of the state, which would be communications, foreign policy, currency, defense, but also things such as education, industry, the economy, banking, and so on. And because of this desire to control the state from the Congress point of view, a more decentralized option was discarded and we had partition. That is my view. There are other views, and I would accept that. After partition, once again, there were two divergent views of how government ought to be. Jinnah died a few months after partition without leaving any kind of signal to the Muslim League or to his followers on what sort of state, what sort of government, what sort of constitution he had envisaged when he thought of partition. What happened 6 months after his death was that the Muslim League, which was then led by Liaquat Ali Khan, approached constitution making with a preamble. In much the same way as we see our preamble as being the précis, the shortened form of the Bill of Rights of our constitution, they also thought that this was something important that they should do. In this preamble was introduced the phrase that sovereignty belongs to Allah. And there was a problem here because in Pakistan of that time, in the late 40s and the early 50s, Bangladesh was still a part of Pakistan. And Bangladesh had a substantial Hindu minority. So it was not easy for that part of Pakistan, what was then called East Pakistan, what we now call Bangladesh, to come to grips with what West Pakistan wanted, which is an Islamic state. Questions were asked mostly by the Hindus from Bengal in what is now Bangladesh on why they were doing this. And the answer, according to Liaquat, was that, and one thing we should remember is that this is just a few years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Liaquat Ali Khan says that mankind had raced ahead on the scientific side, but had either regressed or stayed stagnant on the spiritual, ethical, moral side. And the state of Pakistan would try and bring both of them together by making science and ethics and morality coherent in one space, which would be the Pakistan government. And to the objections raised by the minorities in the Constituent Assembly, he said that they shouldn't worry because most of the laws that the Pakistan state would formulate would be aimed at the majority. They would be aimed at making Pakistan's Muslims better Muslims, that they would make the state a superior state through the ideas of Islam imposed through the government. The problem was they didn't know how to do that. Nobody knows how to do that, to be fair. We don't have in all of the Muslim states across the world with a unified book, the Quran. There is no two Muslim states that share similar laws, that share similar parliaments, that share similar hierarchies. And that is because lawmaking is a modern function. It cannot be left to religion. Liaquat did not believe that. He felt that there was something in faith to be able to be derived and extracted and made modern so that Pakistan would become like the West. He died soon after. He was shot. He was killed a few months after Jinnah died. And then for a decade or so, Pakistan was unable to bring about a constitution. And because of this failure, the army took over. Ayub Khan, who was a young man, but a general. One of the reasons that the British felt that they should leave India at the point that they did, one of the reasons, was that after the Second World War, they felt that there were sufficient officers in the ranks of the Indians who would take charge of the army. The army was the jewel, and having fought in the First World War and the Second World War, the British felt that because most of the officers had been British, they could only leave India when sufficient number of officers had been part of the army who were of Indian origin. And there were about 15,000 at the point when they left. Ayub was one of them. And he took over, and now we are in the 50s, and he becomes president. He formulates this system where two things happen. One is a committee is set up to determine what is the ideal Islamic constitution. The other is there is a series of indirect elections that basically ensures that he retains power. Liaquat, to go back to the 40s, assures Pakistan's minorities that there will be no discrimination against them when it comes to politics. He says that there will be no distinction made between Muslims and non-Muslims when it comes to holding high office. So this changes with Ayub for the first time in the 60s when his law says that no non-Muslim shall hold the post of a president. And that is a law that they have retained to this time. Ayub holds power for a decade or so, loses it. There is a war. Bangladesh is formed. Bhutto becomes the prime minister. Under Bhutto, a law is passed which says that the prime minister, under Ayub, the presidency was the most important function. Under Bhutto, it was the prime ministership which was the most important function. And Bhutto passes a law which says that no non-Muslim shall be the prime minister of Pakistan, a law that continues to this day. So what Liaquat had envisaged as being a positive thrust, that Pakistan would pursue a system where non-Muslims would not be discriminated, were first discriminated against in the 60s under Ayub when they lost the presidency, and in the 70s under Bhutto when they lost the prime ministership. Under Zia-ul Haq, who hung Bhutto and became the president and the dictator in the 80s, a series of laws were passed that attempted in some way to do what Liaquat said the Islamization of the constitution would do. Ambedkar has written quite a lot about this sort of thing, and I think that some of his works that relate to pre-partition and the Hindu-Muslim divide refer to this, and I think he's quite brilliant in being able to predict that this is the kind of thing that will happen in a state that is based on faith rather than law, or rather than human rights. Under Zia, Pakistan tries to make Muslims better Muslims in the way that Liaquat Ali Khan wants them to be. So they do a few things. One is that zakat, which is the contribution that Muslims must make, is to be debited from fixed deposits in Ramzan. Two things happen after this. One is that the Shias say that they can't be subject to this law because they pay their tithe to their own specific head of faith, whether it is the in the case of the Dawoodi Bohras, the Sayyidna, or the Aga Khan in the case of the Khojas, and so on. And so the Shias are made exempt from this. What happens is that Sunnis also tend to withdraw their money from their fixed deposit accounts at the point in Ramzan when that axe is to fall, and then the scheme doesn't really succeed. Another thing that they try to do under the Ehtaram-e-Ramzan law is to try and make people compulsorily fast. And under this law, what happens is that first, as is often the case in our part of the world, minorities get targeted because visually it is difficult to tell apart Hindus and Muslims. As we know, foreigners can't actually say who is Hindu and who is Muslim. And Pakistani minorities who are having a meal, having lunch during Ramzan, get attacked because it is felt by the mobs that they're doing something that they ought not to be doing. The other thing that happens is that the owners of restaurants, movie theaters, shops and establishments who are Muslim go to the state and say, this is not good for business, that the fact that you're asking us to shut down during these hours makes no sense. So what has happened over time is that the Pakistani state has relaxed what it has imposed on the minorities and tried to become more modern while holding on to the fundamentals that were left to them in the late 40s and the early 50s. Some of those things remain. For instance, the persecution of the Ahmadis in Pakistan, a community of Muslims from Punjab who border both sides, who are not treated as Muslims in Pakistan, who are excommunicated pretty much from the political process. That sort of thing remains. But in many other ways, Pakistan has attempted to get out of the trap and modernize. So, for instance, under Musharraf, who seized power about a quarter century ago and held it for 8 or 9 years, the law on rape, on zina, on fornication, was moved out of Sharia and back into the penal code. I should clarify here that if you go to Karachi, I've been to Pakistan many times, but if you go to Karachi or to Dhaka or to Peshawar, and you say things like 420, 302, 144, people know what those numbers mean because these are the laws left behind by Macaulay and his code of 1860. So all of the subcontinent is familiar with the sort of things that Indians know as the law, though it might change now with the new laws that Modi has brought to bear. But for the most part, for about 95% of the law, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India continued after 1947 to hold on to the same jurisprudence, the same laws, though they declared themselves to be different states. Pakistan was an Islamic state, India was secular, Bangladesh is a secular Islamist state, which is the most unusual of the lot. The only part of the Bangladeshi constitution that is Islamist is the opening, which is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. But the rest of it pretty much reads the same as the constitution in India. In fact, today, Bangladesh is the only country on the subcontinent, the only major country on the subcontinent to have its largest minority represented in its cabinet. And this has been the case for the last 6 years. India doesn't have one. Pakistan, I think, used to have one till a few years ago, doesn't at the moment. Bangladesh is the only truly pluralistic representative democracy at this point in time, and has been for the last few years that I can think of. This is the Pakistan story. Let me turn now to India. So India has a constitution. Once again, I think the greatness of Ambedkar is to be found in his relevance not only in the 30s at the roundtable conferences, not only in the 40s and 50s in the Constituent Assembly and in the cabinet, but also today because of his foresight into what this society was. A lot of people are well-meaning. Ambedkar, to my mind, was the only one who was well-meaning and able to penetrate into society and say that something that is unequal in its base, in its social systems, is unlikely to be equal in government. And that is what we have today, that the problems of society, the divisions of society, the prejudices of society, the biases of society are reflected in our constitution. Pakistan, by law, says that no non-Muslim can become president or prime minister. India doesn't have that law. We don't need it. In Pakistan, the presidency was important and remains important and remained important for many decades because the president had the right to dismiss parliament. In India, the president was always a figurehead, which is why we were okay with giving that job to a Dalit or an Adivasi or a prime minister or a Muslim, beg your pardon. It's the prime minister's post that is important in India, and that it's unconscionable. It's very hard to think of a time that that India will be able to accommodate somebody who is from another faith other than Hindu as being the prime minister. In what ways was the constitution undermined internally? So I would say broadly that India's preamble with its talk of liberty, equality, fraternity, writes a check which the constitution cannot cash. That there is the grand statements, the grand vision that the preamble represents is not to be found in the laws that are derived from the constitution. And this happened early on, primarily because the Congress was essentially a Hindu majoritarian party. You could argue that it is not now, or it wasn't 10 or 15 years ago, but certainly under Nehru, the party represented the broad Hindu majoritarian Brahminical sense of what this country ought to be. And this was resisted in many ways, but we can talk about two specific ones in the main. One is Article 25 on the right to propagate. So India is, I think, unique in having a fundamental right, which is also a criminal offense. So the Constitution is telling you this is your fundamental of a Fundamental right is a right that enjoys a high degree of protection from encroachment by the state. So the state cannot or should not be able to encroach on your right to be able to exercise that the authority that freedom that the Constitution gives you. The right to propagate is one of those, and it comes to us in very unique ways. So the Christians specifically ask for the right to propagate. There is a man called Frank Anthony who is an Anglo-Indian, which is a race-based community. He says that for Christians, it is important, an article of faith, he says, that they be able to communicate the good word of Jesus and be able to bring people to their side so that they may find salvation. This is an article of faith for them, that they have to do this. The the Assembly debates this and determines in favor of the right of the Christians. People might not know that Muslims on the subcontinent do not proselytize. Conversions in India happen mostly to the Christian faith. Even those Muslim organizations like the Tablighi Jamaat that spread the word of the faith tend to make better Muslims out of Muslims. It is the Christians who go out and invite people into a Christianity because to them it is an article of their faith that they have to do this to encourage people to accept the word of Jesus. They've done lots of good work. I've been to a couple of Christian schools myself, as have my sisters, and we have benefited from what it is that they have contributed. The Constituent Assembly says that they should have that right. And Article 25 says that to freely propagate is something that Indian Christians should have as a fundamental right. Ambedkar, in his draft, uses the word convert, to freely convert. And because the debate happens and ensues in the way that it does, he does not contribute to the debate on the assumption he makes that the debate makes it clear that propagate and convert are the same thing. The law changes that. In the 70s, in a bench constituted under the emergency, India undoes Article 25. So it is no longer possible to propagate your faith in India. I think the criminalization of propagation is of much more importance to the state than the freedom of expressing it, which is pretty much the same as Pakistan. Pakistan also has the same phrase in its constitution that you can freely propagate your faith, but doesn't mean anything. When you convert a Muslim into a Hindu in Pakistan, you can't. If you were to try to convert people in a village in Jharkhand or a village in Gujarat, you would go to jail. The law also specifically in India discriminates against Adivasis, who are seen as more innocent and more vulnerable to this. And I think that of the top 5 laws that I think that the Supreme Court ought to strike down, Stanislaus versus the state of Madhya Pradesh, which is the foundation law on which all of the criminal laws are based, ought to be struck down. I think that it should be open to all Indians who are adult to choose the faith that they want. And one reason why the Christians feel that this action from courts, these laws were brought about, was that if you don't have these laws, Dalits and Adivasis will abandon Hinduism en masse. Baba Sahib left Hinduism and went into Buddhism. Today, if he were to want to do that, he would require the permission of the state. Ambedkar could not convert out of Buddhism in 2024 in states in all states, including in Gujarat, you have to fill out a form, and a district magistrate or collector will determine whether the conversion will go through, and he or she will ask for all of the details, including who is coming to the ceremony, who is going to authorize the ceremony, what are their phone numbers, what are their Aadhaar card numbers, what do they do, what is their monthly income, all of that, which is none of the business of the state. But Article 25 has become a dead letter in the sense that it exists as a constitutional right, a fundamental right, but cannot really be practiced in most states. In 7 BJP states after 2015, after 2018, I should say, including the state I live in, which is Karnataka, couples cannot marry, and if there is a conversion between two faiths, the permission of the government has to be taken. This is very violative of what Article 25 envisages as the freedom given to Indians of being able to go to the God, go to the religion they want to, with no external pressure from the state. It remains a fundamental right in text, but doesn't really obtain to the citizen in any meaningful way. Article 19 has something about the right to livelihood. And Baba Sahib has written some very incisive, very interesting works on beef. But the fact is that the butchers of Bihar moved the Supreme Court to ask why they were being deprived of their livelihood. And the Chief Justice then said that it was because of Hindu majority sentiment, that we do not have access to a certain kind of meat in some parts of India because of the fact that despite the constitution and what it says that you have a right to livelihood, it is Hindu majoritarian sentiment that will determine what it is that the law will be. It is far easier to find stories in newspapers and on TV channels today about people getting attacked for the possession of beef or the slaughter of cows, or stories that talk about the state's protection of those who slaughter those cows and might have beef in their fridge. The state, the media, the polity has swung against the constitution. We don't have the protection that fundamental rights really ought to give us. There are other ways, minor ways, in which liberty was taken away. Article 21, which talks about life and liberty, exists on paper for the most part, and I should include Congress governments in this, go after dissenters in the time of Narendra Modi, go after political opponents. There is no reason for Kejriwal to be in jail. There was no reason for Hemant Soren to have been in jail during a general election. There is no reason for people like Umar Khalid to be in jail, or Manish Sisodia to be in jail, or the Bhima Koregaon 16, some of whom died in jail, some of whom remain in jail. Sagar Gorkhe remains in jail. There is no reason for that other than the fact that the government of India does not accept the life and liberty concepts of Article 21 to be as true as the Constitution had intended. You could write up laws that are completely contrary to anything in the preamble, to anything in the Bill of Rights, and it would find not just acceptance in Parliament today, or the Parliament of Indira Gandhi, or of Nehru. Article 19 was actually amended under Nehru, or of Rajiv Gandhi, or of Manmohan Singh, and certainly of Modi, and also find an endorsement of that by the Supreme Court. It's difficult to argue for the sort of freedom, the sort of liberty that Ambedkar had foreseen in an ideal state when he was the architect of the constitution that we have. Lastly, I will talk about a few things post 2014, which are new and which I think take us back to the kind of Pakistan that we saw in the 50s and 60s and 70s. That India under the Congress pretended to be adherent to the constitution. It pretended to be pluralistic, to be secular, in a way that we no longer pretend in our time. So to have an act which specifically excludes Muslims from communities that seek asylum in India, of those who came before 31st of December 2014, is new. It is violative of both Article 14 and 15, to my mind, but has neither been heard at length by the Supreme Court, nor has it been adjudicated by it, which I think is a great shame. That something which is fundamental, which opens the Indian Constitution's Bill of Rights, but remains unheard, is, I think, a matter of shame. And I think that Dr. Ambedkar would have felt that it's a matter of shame. That once these rights have been enshrined, why is it that the state cannot uphold them? And the answer appears to be that political authority can override what it is that the Constitution wants us to be as a nation. That is a shame, but it is also true. Another instance, I spoke about Article 19 and the right to livelihood. I spoke about Article 25 and the right to propagate. In Gujarat, there is a law from the Congress era, tightened under Modi, tightened again in 2019, which essentially means that foreigners can rent and buy properties in that state where Gujarati Muslims cannot. They are banned from doing so unless the government expressly, specifically says that they can do so. This is not the kind of country that our constitution foresaw. This is not the kind of state or politics that our preamble imagined. This is not the kind of place that we thought we would be in, where you've got a government in office with 240 MPs, none of whom is a Muslim, the largest minority. We have 200 million Muslims in India, the size of the population of Western Europe. No Muslim MPs from the ruling party in the Rajya Sabha. No Muslim MPs in the previous Lok Sabha of the BJP, 303, or in the one before that. Is this the kind of place we want to be, where the attempt, the energy, or the focus of the major political party is on one part of the population, on how to exclude it and how to persecute it? The answer is obviously no, that this is not what the preamble says we should be as a country. This is not what the preamble says we are aspiring to. But by default, this has become the kind of place that India is. And I think the great challenge, I'll end here, the great challenge for us is how to resurrect that dream that people like B.R. Ambedkar have left us in text, and to be able to actually make it alive, make it viable, and to make it a lived reality rather than just words on a page which are muttered by people in power but are not really implemented on the ground and look very different from what one sees when one leaves one's house and looks around and does not see kind of society that the preamble says that India should be. I'll end here. I'll take questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Akaji. It is very enthralling session. I personally learned a lot. I was not aware of this Pakistan's history and how they particularly evolved or basically progress or under progress during the last 5 decades or something like that. Um, so I will take the questions from the people. So whoever wants to ask the questions, please raise your hand, and I will try to ask in the order the hands have been raised. And at the same time, you can post your questions in the chat box if you want, and we will take your questions from the chat box too. So I have a question from the chat box. So just how Article 25 can be invoked or read in the context of many states who have brought or intended to bring anti-conversion laws, bills, and this question is from Basawa.
There are two problems here. One is how can India's upper caste stop Dalits and Adivasis from becoming a Christian, which means leaving the caste system. Why do Dalits want to go into Buddhism? Why do Dalits want to become Christian? One part might be that they find salvation in a figure. The other part is that they want to find an escape from caste. That Muslims who were interviewed in Tamil Nadu in the 80s after a mass conversion of 1,000 people. And this magazine, India Today, went back to them after 10 years to ask them why they had converted. They felt that they had more dignity, that they could go into a tea shop and they would not be given the separate vessel that Dalits were given. So that is one part of it. The second part is, I think India is a fairly misogynistic society, that we don't want Hindu women and Muslim women to marry into the other community. And therefore, after 2018, we've got these laws, which are called freedom of religion laws, which say that if a person from one religion marries another religion, they have to fill out a form and apply to the government. It is for the government to determine whether the marriage should go through. If there is conversion involved, the woman being converted, even if she's an adult, does not have the agency to convince the state that she converted out of free volition. It is for the man she's marrying and the family she's marrying into to convince the district magistrate or the collector that there was no coercion involved. This is, I think, misogyny. It treats people as infants, including Adivasis and Dalits, and shouldn't be the case. But the fear that upper caste Hindus have is that if we open up freedom of religion, like Baba Sahib Ambedkar went into Buddhism, the lower caste will leave. The lowered castes, I should say, will leave. And that's one reason why we continue to have these laws in 2024.
Hey, thanks, Akaji. So Archit has raised the questions. Archit, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you for organizing this event. Hi, Aakar. Before I ask my question, I'd like to quickly check if I can kind of share my overall thoughts from the talk that we had, or should I frame the question in a poignant manner so that others can also ask?
Yeah, sure. You go ahead with the question first, and if you have the time, then definitely we'll come back to you.
Surely. Thank you so much. Hi, Aakar. Aakar, in your introduction, I noticed Sanjay introduced you as a journalist, and I learned about your work as a journalist, like you were the editor, and now you've been working at Amnesty for a while, and you perhaps understand better than anyone that this is a political problem that we are dealing with when it comes down to addressing issues of minorities. What's happening in India is so shocking, and over the past 8-9 months, I cannot help but wonder that there is a push towards being an apartheid state. Even India, the things that we see, the bulldozing of houses, restrictions of Muslim to kind of get certain properties, as you mentioned in Gujarat. So my question is, how does journalism and policy making intersect, and what can be done? And especially journalists abroad, do they have any ability to influence the discourse in India, because it's very important to kind of have as many voices as possible and talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. No, I think that India is susceptible to journalism abroad because India operates under this secular carapace. So when Jaishankar or Modi go to Europe or go to the US, they don't say we are this Hindutva state that is operating on the principles of the Manusmriti. They say we are a government that abides by the constitution given to us by the assembly, drafted by B.R. Ambedkar, holding true to the principles of pluralism and so on. But because of this hypocrisy, they are vulnerable. And they're vulnerable in two ways. So not in two ways, but I'll cite two specific examples which show the vulnerability. So in the US, House Resolution 745 was passed in late 2019 on the internet blockade in Kashmir. It was tabled by Pramila Jayapal. Trump was the president. It didn't get enough votes to be able to pass. It remained on the table. Jaishankar went to Washington. We don't know what transpired because India is an opaque state. It's not a real democracy. But 15 days after Biden was sworn in, that 17-month blockade was lifted. And my guess is that it was because there was external pressure on the government of India to behave, that Kashmiri children, who were the only part of the world to not receive education during COVID, they got no education, no schooling during COVID because the rest of the world was going through online education and Kashmir couldn't. The other example is the CAA. So we passed this law once again in late 2019. In early 2020, the European Parliament tabled a motion extremely condemnatory of India, saying that it was a law that violated the essential principles of the Constitution. Jaishankar went to Brussels. We don't know what transpired, what the quid pro quo was. The law, though it was passed, was not implemented till weeks before the last election. For 4.5 years, it remained dormant. But external pressure means more in democracies like India than it would in China. China is, I think, is impervious for the most part to what parliaments in Europe and the US say. India is not. And the reason it's not is that we still pretend to be pluralistic. We still pretend to be secular. We still pretend to be non-caste based. And because of that vulnerability, external pressure, especially external media, helps. And I think that that level of external pressure helps us correct our mistakes in a way that internal pressure, including politics, including the judiciary, including civil society, does as well. So I think that's the important bit where people who are not in India but think they can help us should and can in some ways.
Thank you, Aakar. So Vinay, before I ask you to ask your questions, I will just take a questions from the chat box. Arjun Kohli says, I specifically wanted to ask about the book Pakistan and Partition by Dr. Ambedkar. Some people claim it as an important work while others criticize it. Do you think his literature has also been misinterpreted by the Hindu right?
Well, I think the best thing to do with Ambedkar is to read him. I was in my late 20s when I came across Annihilation. And it totally blew my, as they say in Hindi, battiyan ud gayi. I hadn't conceptualized an Indian interpretation of caste in the way that book did. It changed my worldview forever. I don't know if Partition is a book of that stature. It could be. One doesn't have to agree with everything in that book. I think there are things in which Ambedkar says, for instance, that Muslims only vote for chandeliers and carpets in mosques. But we must remember he's speaking from a time before the idea of popular democracy entering the subcontinent. He's writing years before 47. His acuity and penetration into societies is remarkable. But he is not and doesn't claim to be a prophetic in the way that many people want him to be. I think that the best thing to do with him is to collect all his works and read him through. He's one of the most remarkable intellectuals of the world. And the most perfect homage one can do to him is not dispute what others say about him, including the Hindu right, but to read him oneself.
Thank you, Kaji. Vinay, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, and thank you for the organizers for organizing such a wonderful talk. Aakar, thank you so much for bringing us, such a in-depth historical perspective on this minority aspects. Actually, in your presentation, you opined that the Nehru-led Congress party has always been influenced with the Brahminical ideology and those Hindutva ideologies, and it pretended to be a secular party and adhering to the constitutional values. I completely agree with you, and I believe that's what has given birth to Bahujan politics in India later. But in the recent times, how do you see Congress party from that point of view? Do you still think that it is still pretending to adhering to the constitutional values, or it is slowly transforming to be aligning with Ambedkarite principles? That's one question. And another follow-up is, as Bahujans, or as people who actually adhere to the or believe in the constitutional equality and constitutional values, those section of Indian society, what is a better alternative for them other than BJP, if not Congress?
So I would say that vote is only one part of the expression that individuals have in a democratic space. I think protest and courts are also options, particularly if you are marginalized and do not have the numbers in a first past the post system to push back against what society is doing or what government is doing. Protest and courts are important. And I don't think that people from marginalized communities should let go of that, which is one reason why India has criminalized a protest in many ways. Not just Nehru started it, but I'm saying that Article 19, it is impossible for anybody to do what one can do in the West, which is show up at one's workplace with a placard to say that that you oppose this. You have to take the permission of police. You have to give the numbers of the cars that are coming, their registration numbers, and so on. It's for the police to determine whether you can exercise this fundamental right to a peaceful assembly under 19. So I think that vote is one part. I don't know if there is a perfect party that people should vote for if they don't want either Congress or BJP. But it is true that the problem at the moment in India is a focus by the ruling party on persecution of minorities at a scale which is unprecedented. So if you look at the Uyghur in China, they are 1% of the population, about 15, 16 million in all. Jews in the Weimar Republic were less than 1% of the population. Muslims in India are 14, 15%, 200 million, the size of Western Europe. You cannot persecute such a large part of your society without damaging your nation. We must understand that. And once we understand that, I don't have a problem. The issue really is that many people who dislike the BJP don't vote for Congress. They vote for DMK, they vote for ADMK, they vote for TDP, they might vote for the PDP, they might vote for the National Congress, they might vote for the TMC. If you are interested in bigotry, interested in persecution, there is only one party for you across India. That is the BJP. I think Ambedkar would have seen this in a similar way, that this is the only party that's focused not on how to make society more equal, but how to go after one part of society. To the first part of your question, sorry, I forgot what the first part was.
Vinay? Vinay, are you there?
Yeah. I was not unmuted. Anyway, the first part of question was, the Congress Party. How do you see Congress Party now? Do you still see that it is pretending to be adhering to the constitutional values under the new leadership, or
sorry that I forgot the question, Vinay. If we look at the Constituent Assembly debates, who is opposing the idea that there should be access to cattle slaughter and beef? It's the Congress Party. Congress is saying that Dalits should not eat beef. They are not saying it in honest terms. What are they saying? They're saying, oh, India is a malnourished society. We need more cows because cows give milk. Our children need milk. Children need nourishment. Therefore, we should not slaughter cows. They are not saying anything about beef. What happens is that the Congress governments across the states use this pretext of nourishment and animal husbandry and impose on the country, impose on Dalits, impose on Muslims, impose on Christians, impose on Adivasis a ban on beef. That is Congress. In the decades that have followed, India, because India is not governable in the sense that you write a law and people follow it. So what happened in time is cultural practices became law. If in the Northeast, cultural practice was you could eat beef, it became law there. In Kerala and Bengal, if cultural practice said you could eat beef, it became law there. In Gujarat, if cultural practice said you couldn't eat beef, it became a crime there, which is absurd. But it is the way we are, that something taken out of the constitution is misused and maligned in a way that where the state cannot impose itself, it just exceeds to whatever the culture does. Is Congress different today? I don't know. I think that we will find out once it takes power, if it takes power. It will not be easy. Mr. Modi has lost his majority, but I think to eradicate this sense of Hindutva from large parts of North India will not be easy. To educate the population on constitutional rights and equality and liberty in the Ambedkarite sense will not be easy. It's a long battle. And it's a long battle fought not just against the Hindutva and the Brahminical forces, but also against science and modernity. As an economy, we are subject to what happens in the rest of the world. If the rest of the world races ahead of us while we are intent on persecuting our own people, we will be left behind. My worry and my fear is that for the most part, we have been left behind.
Vinay, any follow-up questions, or we can move to the next? Okay, so Roy, before
Thank you. No more questions.
Okay, thanks. Roy, before I come back to you, I will ask the questions in the chat box. So Rajendra Chaudhary asks, what are the circumstances under which the Citizenship Amendment Act becomes viable? Is the discriminatory exclusion of Muslim the only problem with it?
I don't think, like, as a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we should have a problem with anybody coming into India. I have no problem with accepting refugees who are non-Muslim from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. I have no problem with it. I have no problem either with taking on Tamils from Lanka, with Buddhists from Tibet, with Muslims from Nepal. Why is it restricted to these three countries? Why is it restricted to just all faiths except for Islam and Judaism? One should accept that Jews are also left out. Why? Why is it left? Why do we leave out atheists? Why do we leave out people of the LGBT QI persuasion? Why do we leave out the poor? I don't know. It makes no sense. I think any restrictive law should be looked at for what it does, which is beneficial to both the people who seek refuge under it and the society that offers the law. I think neither of those two tests is met by CA.
Thank you, Akash. So one more question from Shahid Jamal. The idea of justice has become invisible in India, particularly regarding the atrocities committed against Muslims. As an observer of human rights violation, what measures do you believe are necessary to reinstate the concept of justice?
Many things need to happen. One is that civil society needs to be stronger. We are vibrant, but not very large. We need to be able to do more work than we are. We should not be jailed when we say things, but we are. The judiciary needs to stand up for the constitution. We can only have great men who give us constitutions who will pass away, and then the rest of us have to abide by them. And the interpreters of the constitution are the justices. They have to say that if Ambedkar's constitution says that under Article 21 there is the life and liberty belongs to the citizen, the state cannot just step in and assume the life and liberty of citizens as casually as it does. Without conviction, people spend years in jail, sometimes a decade in jail. That should not be acceptable in a country which sees Article 21 as a fundamental right. The political opposition has to make issues of the marginalized a priority. Not only Muslims, I think Christians, Dalits, Adivasis, all of them. If you have a NEET exam where 18% marks can get you into a medical college, because somebody who has got twice as many marks as you cannot get into that college because their father cannot pay 50 lakh rupees a year as fees, that is not equality under Article 14. What do we mean by a government, by a state, by a constitution that says equality? But then sort of essentially what your exams become is that it doesn't matter what your rank is, but if your father can pay more money to be able to get you in, the poor don't matter. The poor are the vast majority of this population. All of us have to fight. There are many battles at many phases in many stages that we have to stand up and fight for.
So, Akarji, so you said that the judiciary has to take the actions, but during your speech, you also said that I believe there are on two different occasions. Supreme Court basically has not done anything to even protect the fundamental rights, correct? I believe for the Article 19, which is the right to livelihood, you said that in question to that butchers in Bihar's case, the Supreme Court decided it should be accepted. So, and same thing about the conversion laws, correct? So, in this case, even the judiciary is also failing to basically protect the fundamental rights. So, where to go?
The judiciary is made up of the same people as we are. So if you are a society where the elite is dominated by upper caste, that's also true of the judiciary. If you have Brahmins and Banyas and Agarwals and Guptas and Sinhas and Shahs and Mehtas and Tyagis in the court, you will have judgments that reflect their societal prejudices. The good thing about the justice system is that you can always review it. If a judgment says that Article 19 violations that were upheld by the Supreme Court in the 50s and 60s for the butchers should be reversed, they can be reversed under judicial process. If the justice system believes today, our judges can even undo things that happened in 1528. So they have the power to do whatever whatever can happen over the last century. You can have a large bench come and undo the bail conditions that have been imposed on PMLA, UAPA. You can have a larger bench say that 50% reservation cap should be lifted. I think it should be lifted. Why do we have a cap? why should there be a cap on reservations in a country where the vast majority is poor, where the vast majority is deprived, where the vast majority comes from the marginalized communities? Why should they have a cap on what it is that they can access? There should be a reservation for Brahmins. There should be 5% reservations for Brahmins. 95% should be open for the non-Brahmins. That is what we should ask for. that can work. That the Savarnas only have a 5% or 7%, proportional to their population, they can have reservation, and the rest should be left to the rest of the people. Why should we not have a law like that? That is what we should push for.
Yeah, I agree. So thank you. Roy, you can unmute and ask the question. Roy, are you there?
I'm here now, actually.
Thanks.
Yes, Sanjay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, Aakar, thank you for your time. It's very educational, inspiring, very courageous man. So, I have a two-part question. Part one, how to clone you. So, the reason I'm saying Modi, despite his absolute majority, used two institutions. One, journalism, like the Godi journalism, and the courts. In the social media side, we turned the corner. The mass used to be the consumer. Now it has become producer, and the facts are on the internet media. Amit Shah and Modi both claim that social media work against them because this time the mass really understand the power of social media. So what is next for journalism? How to take this momentum to the next level? And the second question is the continuation of the Vinay question. Where do you see the Congress, how they take this advantage of minority government? So there's a two-part question.
So the second question is also has many parts to it. One is that the leader of the opposition has many specific roles, being part of committees, working with the government, reading lots of papers, and so on. And I hope that Rahul Gandhi has that capacity and that intent and the energy to do that role. Whether or not he will do that, I don't know. The Congress is many parties. One should accept that in Karnataka, it's a very different party than it is in Maharashtra. It's a very different party in UP than it is in Rajasthan. In Gujarat, it's a very different party. In each of those parties, one needs energy, one needs ideas, one needs money, one needs popular support. And I don't think those of us who are not in politics are in a position to offer either advice or wisdom to people who fight elections themselves. There is a mass contact level that they have, Rahul Gandhi or whoever in Congress, that I don't have. I don't meet tens of thousands of people in a year. And for me to assume that I can offer them advice that I think is right would I think be foolish on my part. I can only hope that whatever it is that the opposition does, in some measure, primarily opposes those parts of the BJP's ideology which are unconstitutional, which oppose liberties, which oppose fundamental rights, which are opposed to the Ambedkarite vision. And I think that those are the bits that I would look forward to. There will be things on the economy, that on Kashmir, definitely, that I think that liberals such as myself will have a problem with the Congress no matter whether or not they are in power. What is happening in Kashmir has not begun in 2014. It began much before 1989. It began in the 50s, the deprivation of things that were guaranteed to them. In the Northeast, the way that we have treated Manipur, the way that we have treated the rest of the Northeast, I think these are not the things that have come to us post 2014. These are things that have come to us from the 50s. Can we look at them honestly? I think that I'm hoping that the opposition were to be able to look at that. On the first question, I think social media evolves. I don't know if there is any external pressure that people like media experts and all can do on that. It is, I completely agree with you that I think social media has gone out of the control of the state in democratic societies, including India, which is why government is trying to impose various ways in which it can control it. I don't think it will be possible. Once you have a relatively free society, one of the problems with India is that we cannot be a competent democracy, we cannot be a competent tyranny. So even if you want to be a dictatorship, we don't have the capacity to be a competent dictatorship. And because of that, there will always be spaces for people to say things. And I think that social media has done that. As a journalist, I think one of my sad realizations has been the collapse of mainstream media from the point of view of viability. So if you look at the 6 listed media companies, which include companies like India Today, Dainik Bhaskar, where I worked, and so on, the revenues that they had in 2023 were exactly the same as they had in 2014. They have not grown in 10 years. One reason is obviously that digital, including Google and Facebook, have taken away a lot of the advertising. Another reason that the Indian consumer economy has not grown. There is no reason for Godi media to behave like Godi media because it's not in their self-interest. I hope they realize that now that the government is under 270.
Great, thank you. Roy, do you have any follow-up question?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we have 2 questions in the chat box, and we can take 2 more from anyone who would like to ask the question. So please raise your hands. And so we have a question from Ayaz Ahmad. Is it possible to contain anti-democratic push of BJP's RSS Brahmin Savarna without containing undemocratic impulses of Sayyid Ashraf? Sayyid Ashraf, I believe. Sayyid Ashraf.
So I don't, to my mind, the issue in India has never been, as Nehru said, the bigotry of the minority. Is it true that there is caste within Muslims? Of course it's true. That the Sachar Committee report very clearly tells us that there is a distinction to be made in the sort of Muslims who belong to a particular community. And as a Gujarati from Surat, I should say that we have faced discriminations ourselves. That a very competent Gujarati man from Randir, which is a suburb of Surat, Vastanvi, his name was denied the rectorship of Deoband because he was not seen as being the right caste. That the Ashraf of Deoband felt that this Johnny come lately from Surat was not from a Sayyid family and should not be holding such a job. And though he was very competent, I'm told, he was denied that role. And so there's no denying that we have caste in all parts of our society, including in Christianity, in Islam, and wherever else. There's no denying it. What is the greatest danger? And I would say, going back to Nehru, that we have to protect the population from the excesses by the state. And the state cannot be controlled by the Ashraf. The state cannot be controlled by the Mangalorean Brahmin or Christian. It can only be controlled by the upper caste in the Hindus. And that is the place where we need to make sure that those prejudices are not influencing the state, the laws. Those prejudices are not undoing the promises of either the preamble or of the Constitution.
Great. Thank you, Akarji. One more question from Andy. In your comment, you have mentioned it is not easy to North India to propagate constitutional ideals. Why? Is it anything to do with the majority of educational institutions are occupied by caste advanced society?
I think the only thing holding us back is the political disposition. In all societies will become liberal in time and have become liberal in time. There is no difference between society A and B. We will become the same as another society because human values tend to come together towards freedom in time. We will always be dissatisfied as people who want a better society because we will always want more rights. If the Dalit is given reservation, we also want to make sure that the Dalit woman is not discriminated against for being a woman. We will want to ensure that the Adivasi, after she gets reservation, is not persecuted because of the fact that Adani or Ambani want her land. We will always have a new cause, and that's good, that's fine. But that is human nature. We always want a better world. The good thing, in my opinion, is that there is more of us than those people who want to conserve the current values. That there are more of us who want change and a shift than those people who say that 10 years ago we were a better country and a better world than we are now. And I think that because of that, forward movement is not only possible, but it is inevitable. And I think that once you have that, the admission of that understanding in the political establishment, which I think we do after June 4 to a large extent, things will get better.
Thank you. So Mohan, you have raised the hand. Would you like to ask the questions by unmuting yourself? Mohan? Okay. So I think till Mohan gets ready, I have a question.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was not able to unmute. So
Okay, good.
thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I don't have a question, but I want to appreciate what Aakar speech, mentioned about, why the Christians converted from Hinduism, like Dalits or others. Yeah, that's because of self-respect, no self-respect, and some in Tamil Nadu, like in Kanyakumari and Tirunelveli side, the districts, the woman not allowed to wear shirt on top. So that and British said that if you convert into Christian, you can wear shirt on for women. So that was one of the reasons also that they converted, because they get a self-respect. And also the other one you said that I like it, good idea, that 5%, Brahmin, and then the 98%, let's give it, remove that barrier. Why have the 50%? But in Tamil Nadu, we fought and we have 69%, reservation, like that way, and also there's no conversion stopping. Anybody can convert to any religion, but I know that you mentioned about in Gujarat, you cannot convert into different religion. That's really, I think, I even in Tamil Nadu, that Jayalalitha tried to bring that, and then people
Yes.
opposed, and then he gave up. Yeah,
Yes.
but yeah, that was really good. And then it's a long way to go. And then and also to me, I think everybody asked if Congress is now looking like better than so many years ago. But now they are moving to the left. They are considering everybody equality. They are respecting the way leaders are speaking. I think they will be better off, compared to Imagine if Modi was when we get separate, when we get the freedom. If Modi was there, we'll be screwed. At least Nehru was there, and unlucky that in Pakistan they didn't left. Anyway, thank you very much, and it was nice talk. I really appreciate your point on great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan. And we have two more questions to take, and then we will close the session. So as before, I asked you to ask the questions. So I'm going back to Anand Baliji. He's a very respected Buddhist activist from the North America. Anand Baliji, would you like to ask the questions, or shall I ask on your behalf? Let me check. So he's asking, what is the main cause of declining BSP in India?
JaiBhim sir, please go ahead. Thank
Yeah,
you.
okay.
Please. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we should not, I think those of us who are not really familiar with the 80s should not underestimate what a genius Kanshiram ji was. It is not easy for an individual to grow a party from nothing. And I think what was done in Punjab and in UP and so on in the period that he did, it tells us two things. One is that there is space for such a party to emerge and take power in a state like UP, but it requires an exceptional leader of the kind that he was, and less biographed than he should have been and should be, and I think less talked about than he should be. I'm not a political theorist, so I can't speak to the BSP specifically. But I should say that in my opinion, in my personal opinion, Mayawati has the charisma that he left as the primary leader of the BSP in the north. And I think that her work, I went to the Ambedkar Memorial in Lucknow. It's an outstanding. I think after Shah Jahan, no Indian has built something of that quality. And for those who haven't visited it, who are either watching this or don't know about it, or should go there and see what an astonishing piece of architecture he has built in memory, not just of B.R. Ambedkar, but also the Dalit movement at large. What the BSP specifically needs, I don't know. It has become a UP party. I think that's one of the problems, that her charisma doesn't seem to have expanded beyond the state in the way that Kanshi Ram did. That might be the reason. Another reason could be that that there are alternative Dalit movements, including Ravans, that are more militant, that are more sort of aggressive at the neighborhood level than the BSP is. But then that is speculation. I went to Chandrasekhar Azad's districts and saw his mobilization. It was very good. And I think that you will always have competition in that space, which is a good thing. And I hope personally that given all she has done and what she represents, that she's able to resurrect the party in some way.
Thank you, Aakar. So Ayaz, I think we have asked your questions, but you may have the follow-up questions. So please go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah, so in response to my question, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, Mr. Patel. You responded that Nehru's analysis that minorities can never actually pose threat to the democracy because they cannot take power of the state. That analysis of Nehru over the period of time, don't you think has been proved terribly wrong? That unless until Sayyid Ashraf, those who signify Muslimness, take to democratic politics, try to take power, come out of their madarsa, hijab, burqa, minority education institution, participate in democratic politics, the Hindutva will continue to remain legitimate, will continue to remain validated, will continue to cut down Bahujan democratic aspirations. And this is precisely why Dr. Ambedkar in Pakistan, with the partition of India, was pointing out towards the democratic possibilities that the vast majority of masses, Muslim masses, must undertake. And this is what Sayyid Ashraf prevent. So unless Sayyid Ashraf are in a way defeated in their undemocratic posturing, Hindutva is here to dominate. And the Bahujan, as well as Ambedkarite politics, is condemned to defeat. What is your response to that?
So my understanding is that societal movements tend to happen unobstructed by the state for the most part. How many schools in Maharashtra or in Gujarat or in UP for that matter are closing down every year because there are no students who wish to go into a madrasa? How many students in Bombay are shut? How many schools in Bombay shut down every year because there are not enough students to fill Urdu majority or Urdu medium schools? That's one bit. That the modernization happens outside of the influence of the state. It's society that drives it. Parents want to put their children into a system where they can compete for jobs rather than become some kind of idealized product. The other bit is on fertility. What influence has the Muslim upper class have on the declining fertility rates of Muslims in South Asia? I would say very little. That it is the secular aspirations of Muslim families that have driven fertility rates down, just as they have in the rest of the world, and just as they have in Hindu areas as well. Hindu fertility rates are very different in north of in North India than they are in the South. And the reason is not so much government policy, so much as the fact that society in those parts has driven itself towards change in a way that the state cannot. And to my mind, I think that the positives from this is that humankind tends to do what is best for themselves without getting into ideological battles and nastiness, and in the end, do the right thing.
Thank you, Aakar. So I think that is the last questions we have from the audience. So Aakar, this is just the last questions and for the closing one. We have scheduled this particular speech long time back, even before the elections occurred in India. And that time, at least I believe 3-4 months back, you agreed to speak on this particular subject. And in the last 3-4 months, a lot of has changed in India. So if I would have asked you to give the topics for the today's speech, it would have been the different, or you would have liked to speak on the same subject?
No, Sanjay ji, they would have been the same, because I think these are long-term things. They will outlive. When I die and when you die, we will have to confront with these things in the next generation. Hopefully in the generation after next, we will not have to. But I think unless we look at these fundamental issues that have brought us where we are, we will not be able to. June 4th was important, but it is not as important as the undermining of Ambedkar's constitution from inside. And I think that if our focus is on the right place, the results, whether they are short, medium, or long term, will always be right.
Right, truly true. So, do you have any closing statement before I
don't? I just wanted to thank all of you for joining. I'm glad that we have these spaces to talk in. I think we should have more such spaces. I think that there should be more voices from the marginalized who are listened to, not just by mainstream media, but also by the population at large. We should have parties that are led by the marginalized, that are not restricted or seen as just regional parties, but our parties are seen as parties that represent constitutional values and are the ones that are respected and loved because of that.
Great. Thank you, Aakar. So thank you very much for accepting our invitations and being here. Really, it is very enthralling sessions. We learned a lot, and considering there were so many questions, I believe all the audience also enjoyed your sessions. They learned something different. And thank you everyone for joining.
Sanjay, I think there was one question from Rama Bindu.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that she posted, already posted it. If you can take that, we have 2 minutes here.
Okay, so as exceptions, I will take that. I did not. Okay, so I did not catch the point on Dainik Bhaskar. Request is to please explain again.
Yes, so there are 6 news media companies in India that are listed on the stock market. And the reason why that is important is that you can tell what their top line revenue is. How much money did they make from advertising and a subscription in a year? My point was that for all 6, if you combine all 6 media companies, all 6 listed news media companies that include Dainik Bhaskar, Dainik Jagran, India Today, Times Now is with a BCCL which is not listed, Z News. If you combine all of these, the amount of money that they made, let's say they made 1,000 crore rupees in 2014. They made exactly the same sum in 2023. So in 10 years, their revenues did not grow. My point was that they don't gain anything by being Godi Media. They don't make more money. They have lost money in the last 10 years. But they continue to do what they do. And my hope is that they stop, because their self-interest should be in making money as a company rather than in promoting the government.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed your question, and thanks, Hemant, for bringing it to my notice. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session. We have the similar Ambedkar Lecture Series in 2 weeks on 27 July. And Christina Dhanija she's a very firebrand Dalit activist, and she will be speaking. So please join. So once again, thank you everyone, and enjoy your summer. Thank you very much. Bye.
JaiBhim.
JaiBhim.